The morning sun cast long shadows across the presidential palace in Ouagadougou as Ibrahim Traoré reviewed the security reports on his desk. The young president, dressed in his characteristic military fatigues, had barely slept. Another night of intelligence briefings, another series of attacks in the northern provinces. The jihadist insurgency that had plagued Burkina Faso for nearly a decade showed no signs of weakening, and every decision he made carried the weight of thousands of lives. His office door opened, and Colonel Amadou Diallo entered, carrying a thick folder under his arm. The colonel had been Traoré's trusted advisor since their days fighting together in the Sahel region, back when they were both junior officers facing impossible odds against better-equipped insurgent forces. "Mr. President, we have a situation that requires your immediate attention," Diallo said, placing the folder on the desk. His voice carried an urgency that made Traoré look up from the casualty reports he'd been studying. "What is it?" Traoré asked, leaning back in his chair, his eyes, sharp and calculating despite the exhaustion, fixed on his old friend. "A delegation has arrived from Europe. They claim to be structural engineers sent by an international development consortium. They say they're here to inspect the bridges along the Ouagadougou-Kaya highway. They have documentation, proper visas and letters of recommendation from several European governments." Traoré's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. The Ouagadougou-Kaya highway was crucial. It was the main supply route to the northern military bases, the lifeline that kept soldiers fed, armed and supplied in their fight against the insurgents. If that road was compromised, entire regiments would be cut off. "Structural engineers," Traoré repeated slowly, his fingers drumming on the desk. "When was the last time any European consortium showed interest in our infrastructure without us asking for it first?" Diallo shifted his weight. "That's what caught my attention, sir. The timing is suspicious. We've had increased insurgent activity along that very route in the past 3 weeks. Intelligence suggests they're planning something major." Traoré stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace grounds. Outside, soldiers conducted their morning drills, their movements precise and disciplined. These were the volunteers for the defense of the homeland, young men and women who had answered his call to protect their nation. He thought of his own journey, from the geology student at the University of Ouagadougou to the artillery captain fighting in Kaya, to the president of a nation at war. "Where are these engineers now?" he asked. "At the Ministry of Infrastructure. They've been there since yesterday afternoon, going through the preliminary paperwork. They want to begin inspections tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow morning," Traoré echoed. He turned back to face Diallo. "That's very soon for such an important project. Usually these things take weeks of bureaucratic processing. The ministry fast-tracked their request because of the European government backing," Diallo explained. "Minister Ouedraogo didn't want to create diplomatic complications by delaying them." Traoré walked back to his desk and opened the folder. Inside were photographs of 4 men, all appearing to be in their 40s or 50s, dressed in casual business attire. Their credentials seemed impeccable. University degrees from prestigious institutions, years of experience in civil engineering, recommendations from former employers. But something felt wrong. "Have our people verified these credentials?" Traoré asked. "Yeah, we're working on it, but it takes time to contact European universities and companies. The ministry wanted to be cooperative and efficient." "Cooperative and efficient," Traoré murmured. Those weren't words that usually described government bureaucracy in Burkina Faso, or anywhere else for that matter. Someone had greased the wheels, pushed this through faster than normal. The question was why. He thought back to his training in Morocco and France, the lessons about asymmetric warfare and insurgent tactics. The enemy didn't always come with guns blazing. Sometimes they came with smiles and handshakes, with official papers and legitimate-looking credentials. Sometimes the deadliest weapons were hidden in plain sight. "I want full background checks on all 4 men, Traoré ordered. "Contact Interpol. Contact their home countries' intelligence services. I want to know everything about them, from where they went to school to what they ate for breakfast last week, and I want it done quietly." "Yes, sir." "Should we delay the inspection?" Traoré considered this carefully. If the engineers were legitimate, delaying them would create diplomatic problems at a time when Burkina Faso was already isolated internationally. Since breaking ties with France and withdrawing from ECOWAS, the country couldn't afford to alienate potential partners. But if they were insurgents in disguise, Letting them proceed could be catastrophic. No delay, he decided, but I'm going to personally oversee this inspection. Tell them the president himself will accompany them to ensure the highest level of cooperation and security. Make it sound like an honor. Diallo's eyes widened slightly. Sir, that puts you at significant risk. If there's danger, I need to see it myself, Traoré interrupted. This is my country, Amadou. These are my people. I won't ask my soldiers to walk into a trap while I sit safely behind palace walls. That's not who we are. The colonel nodded slowly. He'd known Traoré long enough to recognize when an argument was futile. I'll arrange a full security detail. Elite presidential guard, counter-terrorism specialists, the works. Good. And Amadou? Traoré looked at his friend with an intensity that made the colonel stand straighter. I tell no one about my suspicions, not the ministry, not even our own security personnel beyond those who absolutely need to know. If someone inside our government is compromised, I don't want to tip them off. After Diallo left, Traoré stood alone in his office, looking at the photographs of the 4 engineers. Their faces were unremarkable, the kind of middle-aged European men you'd see in any airport or hotel lobby. But in his experience, the most dangerous enemies were often the ones who looked the most harmless. He picked up his phone and made a call to the head of military intelligence. There was work to be done, and less than 24 hours to do it. The bridges along the Ouagadougou-Kaya highway had been built in the 1970s during the French colonial era, sturdy concrete structures designed to last for decades. They were due for inspection. That much was true. But the timing, the speed of approval, the foreign interest, all of it felt like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. As night fell over Ouagadougou, Traoré remained in his office, studying maps of the highway, reviewing intelligence reports, and preparing for what might come. Outside, the city continued its evening rhythms, unaware that their president was planning to personally confront what might be a deadly threat. The weight of leadership had never felt heavier, but it was a weight Ibrahim Traoré had trained his entire life to carry. Chapter 2. The next morning arrived with the characteristic dusty haze that often settled over Ouagadougou during the dry season. Ibrahim Traoré woke before dawn, as was his habit, and went through his morning routine with military precision: physical exercise, a cold shower, prayer, and then breakfast. A simple meal of millet porridge and local tea. Some of his advisors had suggested he adopt more presidential habits, move to fancier quarters, eat imported foods, but Traoré had refused. He remained a captain's salary, lived modestly, and insisted on sharing the same hardships as his people. At 7 o'clock, he arrived at the Ministry of Infrastructure, accompanied by Colonel Diallo and a security detail that tried to look casual but was armed to the teeth. The 4 European engineers were already there, waiting in a conference room with Minister Ouedraogo, a portly man in his 60s who seemed nervous about the president's unexpected involvement. "Mr. President," Ouedraogo said, rising quickly from his chair, "this is an unexpected honor. I wasn't aware you would be joining us today. In these times, Minister, I believe it's important for me to personally witness our nation's development projects," Traoré replied smoothly. He turned to the 4 engineers, who had also stood upon his entrance. "Gentlemen, welcome to Burkina Faso. I understand you're here to help us ensure the safety of our infrastructure." The lead engineer, a tall man with graying hair named Henrik Larsson, according to his badge, stepped forward with an extended hand. "Mr. President, it's an honor to meet you. Yes, we're here from the European Infrastructure Development Initiative. We specialize in assessing aging bridge structures in developing nations. Your bridges are over 50 years old, and we want to make sure they're still safe for the heavy military traffic they've been experiencing." Traoré shook his hand, studying the man's face carefully. Larsson's grip was firm, his English accent neutral, possibly Scandinavian. His smile seemed genuine, but there was something in his eyes, a calculation that went beyond professional courtesy. "Zoz, that's very generous of your organization," Traoré said, "though I must confess, I'm curious why you chose now to conduct these inspections. We've had these bridges for decades without much international interest." Another engineer, a shorter man named Jean Mercier who spoke with a French accent, interjected, "Timing is often a matter of funding and opportunity, Mr. President. Our consortium recently received a grant specifically for Sahel region infrastructure. When we learned about the strategic importance of your northern highway, we felt it was our duty to offer assistance. The Sahel region, Traoré repeated thoughtfully. Yes, we're very much part of that troubled area. Tell me, Mr. Mercier, have you worked in Mali or Niger as well? There was the briefest hesitation before Mercier answered. We've done assessments in Mali, yes. Niger is on our schedule for next quarter. Traoré filed away that hesitation for later consideration. I see. Well, gentlemen, shall we proceed? I've arranged for a convoy to take us to the first bridge. I hope you don't mind, but for security reasons, I'll be accompanying you personally. The four engineers exchanged glances. Larsen's smile never wavered, but Traoré caught the subtle tension in his jaw. Of course, Mr. President, though we wouldn't want to impose on your valuable time, surely you have more important matters to attend to. Nothing is more important than the safety of my people and my soldiers, Traoré replied firmly. Besides, I studied geology at university. I have some understanding of structural assessments. Perhaps I can learn from experts like yourselves. The convoy that left Ouagadougou an hour later was substantial. 2 armored vehicles led the way, followed by the SUV carrying Traoré, Diallo, and Larsen. The other 3 engineers followed in a separate vehicle with armed guards, and 2 more military trucks brought up the rear. As they drove north through the outskirts of the capital, Traoré observed the landscape changing from urban sprawl to rural farmland, and then to the drier terrain that characterized the approach to the Sahel. Your security is very thorough, Mr. President, Larsen commented from the back seat. We live in dangerous times, Traoré replied. I'm sure you're aware of the insurgent activity in this region. I wouldn't want anything to happen to our distinguished guests. Of course, we appreciate your concern for our safety. They drove in relative silence for a while, the only sounds being the rumble of the engine and the occasional crackle of radio communication between the security vehicles. Traoré used the time to study Larsen in the rearview mirror. The engineer seemed relaxed, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound journal, looking out the window at the passing scenery. But his hands, Traoré noticed, were calloused in ways that didn't quite match an office engineer's profession. They were the hands of someone who did regular physical work, heavy work. The first bridge was about 80 kilometers north of Ouagadougou, spanning a seasonal river that would be dry for several more months until the rains came. It was a solid concrete structure, maybe 30 meters long, with 3 support pillars rising from the riverbed. The convoy pulled to a stop, and soldiers immediately established a security perimeter. Impressive structure, Larsen said, stepping out and stretching. French colonial engineering was quite good in its day. Let's have a closer look. The 4 engineers unpacked their equipment, an array of devices that Traoré recognized from his university days: ground-penetrating radar, ultrasonic testing equipment, concrete core samplers, and various measuring instruments. They began their work with professional efficiency, moving along the bridge and conducting tests on the concrete, the support pillars, and the roadbed. Traoré watched carefully, noting their procedures. Everything seemed legitimate. They were doing exactly what structural engineers should do, but something still felt wrong. He noticed that Mercier kept glancing at his watch, as if concerned about timing. And the third engineer, a quiet German named Otto Schmidt, seemed more interested in the underside of the bridge than the surface that actually bore traffic. Mr. President, Colonel Diallo said quietly, approaching from where he'd been coordinating with the security detail. Intelligence just sent through preliminary background checks. All 4 men's credentials appear to check out. They are who they claim to be. Registered engineers with legitimate companies. Appears to check out, Traoré echoed. That's not the same as definitely checking out, is it? No, sir. Full verification will take another day or 2, but on the surface, everything seems legitimate. Traoré nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the engineers. Tell me, Amadou, if you were going to sabotage a bridge, how would you do it? Diallo thought for a moment. Explosives in the support pillars would be most effective. Bring down the pillars, the whole structure collapses. But you'd need to get the explosives deep inside the concrete, which would require drilling and placement. It would take time and equipment. And it would be easier if you already had access under the guise of a legitimate inspection, Traoré added. You could plant the charges while pretending to conduct tests. You think that's what they're doing? I think, Traoré said carefully, that we should watch very closely what they put into those test holes. Chapter 3. The inspection continued through the afternoon heat. the sun beating down mercilessly on the concrete bridge. Ibrahim Traoré remained present throughout, occasionally asking technical questions that demonstrated his actual knowledge of structural engineering. If the engineers found his presence unusual, they gave no sign, maintaining their professional demeanor and explaining their procedures whenever he inquired. "We're taking core samples," Larsen explained, showing Traoré a cylindrical drill bit. "This allows us to analyze the concrete's internal composition, check for degradation, water infiltration, that sort of thing. We drill down about 30 centimeters, extract a sample, and then seal the hole back up." "And how do you seal it?" Traoré asked. "Quick-setting concrete compound. We want to maintain the structural integrity, obviously. Can't leave holes in the bridge." Traoré watched as Schmidt operated the drilling equipment on one of the main support pillars. The drill bit whined as it penetrated the old concrete, and after several minutes, Schmidt pulled out a cylindrical core sample. He examined it briefly, made some notes, and then reached for a container of grey compound to fill the hole. "May I see that?" Traoré asked, gesturing to the container. Schmidt hesitated for just a fraction of a second before handing it over. "Of course, Mr. President, it's just standard concrete repair compound." Traoré examined the container, noting its weight and consistency. It seemed normal enough, but he noticed that the label was generic ham without any specific manufacturer information. "Where do you purchase this compound?" "Various suppliers," Larsen interjected smoothly. "We buy in bulk for multiple projects. It's all certified and meets international standards, I assure you." "I'm sure it does," Traoré replied, handing the container back. But he caught Colonel Diallo's eye and gave a subtle signal. The colonel understood immediately. As the engineers continued their work, moving to different sections of the bridge, Diallo quietly instructed one of the security personnel to collect samples of the material the engineers were using to seal the test holes. The soldier waited until the engineers were focused on a different area, then scraped some of the freshly applied compound into a small evidence bag. By late afternoon, the engineers had completed their inspection of the first bridge. They packed up their equipment, made extensive notes, and declared the structure sound but recommended regular monitoring. The convoy moved on to the second bridge, about 40 kilometers further north, closer to the conflict zones where insurgent activity was more frequent. This bridge was similar in construction but showed more visible wear. Cracks spiderwebbed across parts of the concrete, and some of the reinforcing steel was exposed where the protective concrete had eroded away. The engineers' assessment here would be more critical and their work more extensive. As they began their inspection, Traoré received a secure phone call from the palace. He stepped away from the group, walking to where the military vehicles provided some privacy. "Mr. President, this is General Sawadogo from Military Intelligence," the voice said. "We've completed a deeper background check on the 4 engineers. There are some irregularities." Traoré felt his pulse quicken. "Go on." "Henrik Larsen, the lead engineer. His credentials are real, but we found a gap in his employment history. He claims to have been working continuously for the past 10 years, but there's a 6-month period 3 years ago where we can't verify his whereabouts. His company has no records of him during that time." "What about the others?" "Jean Mercier spent time in Mali 2 years ago, as he claimed, but our contacts in Malian intelligence say he was asking questions about military installations, not bridges. He was flagged as a person of interest but never arrested." "Otto Schmidt has connections to several companies that have been accused of dealing with sanctioned regimes. And the 4th man, Antonio Romano, he's the cleanest of the bunch, but his expertise is actually in demolitions, not structural assessment." Traoré absorbed this information, his mind racing. Demolitions expert pretending to be a structural engineer. That's convenient. "Sir, I recommend you abort the inspection immediately and detain all 4 men for questioning." "Not yet," Traoré decided. "If we arrest them now based on circumstantial evidence, we might never find out what they're really planning. But I want explosives experts brought to this location immediately. Have them examine everything these men have touched, every hole they've drilled, every compound they've used to seal those holes. Sir, if they're planting explosives, then we'll find them and remove them. But I want to catch them in the act if possible. I want to know who sent them and why. This could be bigger than just 4 men trying to sabotage bridges." He ended the call and returned to the inspection site. The engineers were working on the main support pillar, drilling deeper than they had at the first bridge. Romano, the demolitions expert posing as a structural engineer, was particularly focused on this work, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Traoré approached Colonel Diallo. "Explosives experts are on their way. ETA 2 hours. Until then, we watch everything they do. Every movement, every container they open, every hole they drill. Should I increase the security perimeter? No, I don't want them to know we're suspicious. Act normal, but have sharpshooters positioned where they can cover all 4 men simultaneously. If this goes wrong, I want to be able to neutralize the threat instantly." As evening approached, the engineers announced they needed to work through dusk to complete their assessment of the second bridge. Floodlights were set up, powered by portable generators, casting harsh shadows across the structure. The sound of drilling echoed through the dry riverbed below. Traoré watched as Romano carefully measured something inside one of the drill holes, using an instrument that didn't look like any structural testing equipment he'd ever seen. The man's concentration was intense, his movements precise. He was placing something inside the hole, something small that he removed from a container marked as testing sensors. "What are those sensors for?" Traoré asked, walking closer. Romano looked up, startled. He quickly composed himself. "They measure internal stress and strain. We leave them in place for 24 hours, then retrieve them to download the data. It gives us information about how the bridge responds to traffic and temperature changes." "Interesting," Traoré said. "I've never heard of that technique. Which university developed it?" There was a pause. Romano glanced at Larson before answering. "It's proprietary technology, developed by our consortium's research division." "I see. And you'll be returning tomorrow to retrieve these sensors?" "Yes, Mr. President. First thing in the morning." Traoré nodded, but his mind was already working through the implications. If these weren't sensors but rather timing devices or detonators, the bridges could be set to explode tomorrow after the engineers had safely left the country. It would look like structural failure, not sabotage. Blame would fall on aging infrastructure, not on deliberate attack. The specialized explosives team arrived as darkness fully settled over the highway. They were dressed in civilian clothes, carrying equipment that looked like telecommunications repair gear to avoid raising suspicion. Traoré met with their leader, a veteran demolitions expert named Lieutenant Konate, away from the engineers' sight. "We need you to analyze the compound they're using to fill the drill holes," Traoré explained. "And I want those sensors they're placing inside examined. But do it carefully. If they are explosives, I don't want them triggered prematurely." "Understood, sir. We'll need to wait until they're finished and have moved away from the bridge. Then we can do our analysis." The engineers worked for another hour before finally packing up their equipment. They announced that they would return to Ouagadougou for the night, rest and come back in the morning to retrieve their sensors and complete their assessment. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. President," Larson said as they prepared to leave. "This has been a very productive day." "Indeed it has," Traoré replied, shaking the man's hand once more. "I look forward to your final report. Drive safely. The road can be dangerous at night." As the engineer's vehicle departed under escort back toward the capital, Traoré turned to Lieutenant Konate. "Now, check everything." Chapter 4. The explosives team worked quickly but carefully under the harsh glare of the portable floodlights. Ibrahim Traoré watched from a command post established in one of the armored vehicles, monitoring their progress through binoculars and listening to their communications over the radio. Lieutenant Konate was the first to examine the compound used to seal the drill holes. He carefully extracted a sample from one of the recently filled holes on the main support pillar, placing it in a portable analysis kit. After several minutes of testing, his voice crackled over the radio. "Mr. President, the compound contains Semtex mixed with concrete. It's expertly blended to look and feel like normal repair material, but the ratio is approximately 60% high explosive to 40% concrete filler. This is military-grade stuff." Traoré felt his blood run cold despite the warm night air. His suspicions had been correct, but having them confirmed brought no satisfaction. These men had nearly succeeded in placing powerful explosives throughout critical infrastructure while everyone watched, thinking it was a legitimate inspection. "What about the sensors?" he asked. "Checking now, sir." On the bridge, 2 members of Konate's team were carefully working to expose one of the devices Romano had placed deep inside a drill hole. They used dental tools and fiber-optic cameras to examine it without disturbing its placement. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, Konate's voice returned. "Sir, these are definitely not sensors. They're electronic detonators connected to timing devices, very sophisticated. They're set to trigger tomorrow at 1000 hours. All of them will go off simultaneously, 10 o'clock in the morning. That would be precisely when the convoy would be crossing these bridges on their way back from the third inspection site further north. The bridges would collapse with the presidential convoy on them. It would look like a tragic accident, aged infrastructure failing under the weight of military vehicles. No one would think to check for explosives in the rubble. Can you disarm them?" Traoré asked. "Yes, sir, but it will take time. There appear to be multiple redundancies built into the system. They really didn't want these to fail to detonate." "How long?" "Several hours to make sure we've neutralized everything safely. If we rush it, we risk triggering them." Traoré considered his options. The smart play would be to evacuate us, cordon off the area, and let the experts do their work. But that would alert the engineers that their plan had been discovered. They would disappear, and with them, any chance of learning who had sent them and whether there were other attacks planned. "Colonel Diallo," Traoré called. His friend approached immediately. "Don't I want the engineers, hotel in Ouagadougou surrounded. Full surveillance, but discreet. Don't let them know we're watching. If they try to leave the country, arrest them immediately. And if they don't try to flee, then we let them think everything is proceeding as planned. Tomorrow morning, they'll return here to collect their equipment and watch their work succeed. Except we'll be ready for them. Sir, with respect, you're not seriously considering returning here tomorrow with those men?" Traoré smiled grimly. "I'm considering it very seriously. If we want answers, we need to let them think they're winning, at least for a little while longer." Throughout the night, the explosives team worked methodically to neutralize the devices. Each drill hole had to be carefully excavated, the explosive compound removed, the detonator disabled. It was painstaking work that required absolute precision. One mistake could trigger a blast that would kill everyone on the bridge and destroy crucial evidence. Traoré remained at the site, refusing to leave even when his security detail suggested he return to the safety of Ouagadougou. He helped where he could, using his geology background to assist in understanding the structural implications of the sabotage. As he worked alongside the soldiers and specialists, he thought about the broader implications of this attack. This wasn't just about 4 foreign engineers. This was a sophisticated operation that required significant resources and planning. Someone had funded it, coordinated it, provided the materials and intelligence. The timing was too perfect, coinciding with increased insurgent activity in the region. This was part of something larger, a coordinated effort to destabilize or eliminate Burkina Faso's leadership. By 4 in the morning, Lieutenant Konate reported success. "All devices neutralized, Mr. President. We've removed approximately 40 kilograms of explosives from this bridge alone. If they detonated, the entire structure would have collapsed instantly. And the first bridge. Team 2 reports similar findings there. They're still working on removal, but they expect to be finished within the hour." Traoré nodded, feeling exhaustion settling into his bones, but there was no time to rest. He needed to prepare for the morning's confrontation. He gathered his senior officers around the command vehicle. "Here's what's going to happen," he began. "At 0700, we're going to act as if nothing is wrong. When the engineers arrive for their final inspection, we'll treat them exactly as we did yesterday. Professional, courteous, trusting. We'll proceed to the third bridge site as planned." "Sir," one of the officers objected, "that puts you and everyone in the convoy at risk. What if they have backup plans? What if there are more explosives we haven't found?" "Then my explosives team will check the third bridge before we arrive. Thoroughly. But I don't believe they'll risk anything at that site. The third bridge is too close to active combat zones. Too many witnesses, too many variables. No, their plan was to use the first 2 bridges, where the inspections appeared routine and safe." "What's the end game, sir?" Colonel Diallo asked. "When do we make the arrests?" Traoré considered this carefully. "We let them collect their equipment from the bridges. Let them think everything is proceeding as planned. Then, when they believe they're safe, when they think the mission is accomplished and they're about to leave the country, that's when we move. I want to know who they contact, who they report to. I want to trace this conspiracy to its source." As the sun rose over the Sahel, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, The presidential convoy prepared for another day of inspections. The bridges had been carefully restored to appear unchanged. The explosive compound had been replaced with actual concrete, the detonators with inert replicas. To a casual observer, nothing would seem amiss. Chapter 5. Henrik Larsson's vehicle arrived at the second bridge site at exactly 7:30, right on schedule. The four engineers emerged looking refreshed and confident, carrying their equipment and wearing the same professional demeanor as the previous day. If they were nervous about their deadly cargo being discovered, they showed no sign of it. "Good morning, Mr. President," Larsson greeted, seeming genuinely pleased to see Traoré waiting for them. "I hope you rested well. We're eager to collect our sensor data and move on to the final inspection site." "I slept adequately," Traoré replied, which was technically true since he hadn't slept at all. "I'm curious to see what your sensors have recorded. This is fascinating technology." Romano immediately went to work retrieving his devices. He used a specialized tool to carefully extract what he believed were functioning detonators from the drill holes, placing each one into a padded case with elaborate care. He handled them exactly as someone would handle live explosives, though he maintained the fiction that they were sensitive electronic sensors. Traoré watched this performance with barely concealed contempt. The man was good, he had to admit. Every movement, every precaution, every technical explanation sounded completely legitimate. If Traoré hadn't known the truth, he would have been convinced. "Interesting readings," Romano commented, studying a device that supposedly downloaded data from the sensors. "The structural stress is higher than I expected. This bridge really does need reinforcement work soon." "I'll inform our Ministry of Public Works," Traoré replied smoothly. "Perhaps your organization would be interested in bidding on the reinforcement contract." There was the briefest flicker in Larsson's eyes, a moment where his facade almost cracked. "Perhaps. We'll include recommendations in our final report." They proceeded to the first bridge, where the same charade played out. The engineers collected their sensors, made their notes, and expressed professional concern about the aging infrastructure. All the while, Traoré maintained his role as the interested, trusting president who was simply grateful for their expertise. The drive to the third bridge took them deeper into the northern territories, into regions where the insurgent presence was more pronounced. The landscape became progressively more arid, more scarred by conflict. They passed abandoned villages, burned-out vehicles, and frequent military checkpoints. The engineers grew noticeably more nervous as they traveled further from the relative safety of the capital. "Is it safe to continue?" Mercier asked at one point, eyeing a destroyed building near the highway. "We've heard reports of attacks in this area." "We have adequate security," Traoré assured him, "and the military controls this road. The insurgents know better than to attack a convoy this size." But privately, Traoré had his own concerns. The area was indeed dangerous, and there was always the possibility that the insurgents and these foreign saboteurs were working together. He'd ordered additional military units to secure the road ahead, establishing an iron corridor of protection along their route. The third bridge was the largest of the three, spanning a wider river that still carried some water even in the dry season. It was also the most critical strategically, as it provided the only practical crossing point for military vehicles heading to the northern bases. Its destruction would severely hamper operations against the insurgents. The explosives team had arrived hours before and conducted a thorough sweep. As expected, they found no explosives. This bridge had never been part of the plot. It existed solely to maintain the fiction that this was a comprehensive structural assessment, not a targeted assassination attempt. The engineers conducted their inspection with the same professional thoroughness, drilling test holes, taking samples, making measurements, but Traoré could sense their eagerness to finish and leave. They were professionals, but they were also humans operating under extreme stress. The longer they remained in this dangerous area, the more their nervousness showed. By mid-afternoon, they declared the inspection complete. They packed their equipment, documented their findings, and prepared to return to Ouagadougou. Larsson approached Traoré with an extended hand. "Mr. President, thank you for your hospitality and cooperation. We have everything we need for our report. We'll compile our findings tonight and present them to your Ministry of Infrastructure tomorrow morning before our flight back to Europe." "Excellent," Traoré replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I look forward to reading your conclusions. Safe travels back to the capital." The convoy formed up for the return journey. The engineer's vehicle was positioned in the middle, surrounded by security vehicles, exactly as it had been for the past 2 days. As they drove south, away from the combat zones and back toward civilization, Traoré could see the engineers visibly relaxing. They believed they had succeeded. In the lead armored vehicle, Traoré sat with Colonel Diallo and reviewed the surveillance reports from Ouagadougou. "What's the status on their hotel?" "Under constant watch, sir. They made several phone calls last night, all to European numbers. We're working on tracing them, but they used encrypted satellite phones, sophisticated communications security, and their departure flight, scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. 4 seats on Air France to Paris, with connections to different cities. They're splitting up as soon as they leave our airspace." Traoré nodded thoughtfully. "That's what I would do, disappear into the crowd, make it impossible to track them all. But they're making one mistake." "What's that, sir?" "They think they've already won. They believe those bridges are rigged to explode, that I'll be dead within hours of their departure, and that the chaos will provide cover for their escape. Overconfidence makes people careless." As the convoy approached the outskirts of Ouagadougou, Traoré made his decision. "When we reach the ministry, I want all 4 men detained. No charges announced yet. Just administrative delays with their paperwork. Make it seem bureaucratic and annoying, not suspicious. Hold them overnight for final verification of their credentials. We'll make our move tonight, when they think they're just dealing with African bureaucracy, not a criminal investigation." The convoy pulled into the Ministry of Infrastructure compound as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The engineers emerged, expecting to simply drop off their final documentation and return to their hotel. Instead, they were met by ministry officials who politely but firmly explained that there were minor irregularities in their paperwork that needed to be resolved before they could leave the country. "This is outrageous," Larsen protested. "We have all the proper documentation. We've been cleared by your government." "I'm sure it's just a formality," Traoré interjected smoothly. "You know how bureaucracy works. Sometimes these things take time. Perhaps you could spend the night in more comfortable government guest quarters while this is sorted out. I'll personally ensure it's resolved by morning." The engineers had no choice but to agree. They were escorted to a secure facility that was officially described as a VIP guest house, but was actually a detention center for high-level prisoners. It was comfortable, well-appointed and completely isolated from the outside world. As night fell over Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré stood in the operations center of military intelligence headquarters, surrounded by screens showing surveillance footage, communication intercepts, and intelligence reports. The real work was about to begin. Chapter 6. The interrogation room was deliberately unremarkable. Bare concrete walls, a metal table, uncomfortable chairs, and harsh fluorescent lighting that never dimmed. Henrik Larsen sat alone, his confident facade beginning to crack after 6 hours of isolation. He demanded lawyers, demanded to contact his embassy, demanded to speak with President Traoré. All his demands had been politely acknowledged and completely ignored. When the door finally opened, it wasn't a junior officer or intelligence agent who entered. It was Ibrahim Traoré himself, dressed in his military fatigues, carrying a folder thick with documentation. He sat down across from Larsen without saying a word, simply opening the folder and laying out photograph after photograph on the table. Each photograph showed a drill hole, a detonator, a sample of explosive compound. Each one was meticulously documented with timestamps, locations, and technical analysis. Larsen's face went pale as he realized what he was seeing. "Would you like to revise your story about structural sensors?" Traoré asked quietly. Larsen stared at the evidence, his mind clearly racing through options. Finally, he looked up at Traoré with something approaching respect in his eyes. "How did you know?" "I didn't. Not at first. But I've been a soldier for most of my adult life. I've fought insurgents who use deception, who hide weapons in places you'd never suspect, who smile while planning your death. You were good, very good. But you made mistakes. Small ones, but enough." "What mistakes?" "Your hands. They were wrong for an office engineer. Your expertise in demolitions when you claimed to be a structural specialist. The way Romano handled those detonators, with the practiced care of someone who knows exactly how dangerous they are, and most importantly, the timing. Why now? Why this sudden interest in our bridges when no one has cared about them for decades? If you're enjoying this story, Consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue bringing you more content. Larson leaned back in his chair, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. You understand this isn't personal, Mr. President, it's business, geopolitics. You've made powerful enemies by rejecting Western influence, by cozying up to Russia, by withdrawing from ECOWAS. There are people who believe your continued existence threatens regional stability. Threatens Western interests, you mean. Stability, interests. Sometimes they're the same thing. Larson shrugged. I'm a contractor. I do what I'm paid to do. The politics are above my pay grade. Who paid you? That I won't tell you. Not because of loyalty, but because I value my life. The people behind this have very long reaches. If I talk, I'm dead, whether I'm in your prison or walking free in Stockholm. Traoré studied the man carefully. You're probably right, but here's what I know. You're part of a network, not an isolated cell. This operation required intelligence about our military movements, insider access to fast-track your approvals through our ministry, and coordination with insurgent activities to provide cover for your work. Someone inside my government is compromised. Larson's expression confirmed what Traoré had suspected. There was a traitor, possibly more than one, feeding information to foreign intelligence services. Over the next several hours, Traoré interrogated each of the 4 engineers separately. Romano, the demolitions expert, cracked first. Unlike Larson, he was motivated more by money than ideology. And when faced with the choice between a lengthy prison sentence in Burkina Faso or cooperation, he chose cooperation. It was supposed to be clean, Romano explained, his accent revealing him to be Italian despite his cover documentation. You die in what looks like an infrastructure accident. The bridges collapse, taking out your convoy. With you gone, there's a power vacuum. Your military council fractures, and in the chaos, certain interested parties can install a more cooperative leadership. And the insurgents? They were supposed to launch a major offensive within hours of your death, not coordinated with us directly. But the timing was convenient. Your military would be leaderless, confused, dealing with a national tragedy. The insurgents would have their best chance in years to seize major territory. Who gave you the intelligence about my travel schedule? Romano hesitated. A government official, that's all I know. We never met him directly. Everything was through encrypted communications and dead drops. But he knew everything. Your routes, your security protocols, the bridge inspection schedule. He's high up. Had to be. Traoré felt cold fury building in his chest. Somewhere in his government, in the circle of people he trusted to run the country and protect its people, was someone who had sold out to foreign interests. Someone who had been willing to facilitate his assassination and plunge Burkina Faso into chaos. He left the interrogation rooms and convened an emergency meeting with his closest advisors. Present were Colonel Diallo, General Sawadogo from Military Intelligence, the head of Presidential Security, and 3 other senior military officers who had fought alongside Traoré in the northern campaigns. We have a traitor, Traoré announced without preamble. Someone with access to classified information about presidential movements and security protocols. Someone who can fast-track foreign nationals through our bureaucracy without raising flags. The list of people with that level of access is short. General Sawadogo had anticipated this. I've been conducting discreet inquiries, Mr. President. There are 3 individuals who had all the necessary access. Minister Ouedraogo from Infrastructure, Deputy Director Camara from State Security, and Colonel Basole from the Presidential Guard. Basole, Traoré felt a chill. Colonel Basole had been with him since the 2022 coup, had been one of the officers who had supported his rise to power. I know it's difficult to consider, sir, but we must investigate all possibilities, then investigate, but carefully. If we alert the traitor that we're looking, they'll disappear or worse, trigger whatever contingency plans they have in place. I want full surveillance on all 3, communications monitoring, financial records, everything. But make it invisible. As his team dispersed to begin their investigation, Traoré returned to his office alone. Dawn was breaking over Ouagadougou, and the city was waking to another day. Unaware of how close it had come to catastrophe, he stood at his window, looking out over the capital he had sworn to protect, and thought about the weight of leadership, of trust, of betrayal. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Lieutenant Konaté. 3rd device found at Palace. in your private quarters. Same signature as bridge explosives. Traoré closed his eyes briefly. They hadn't just tried to kill him on the bridges. They'd had a backup plan, an explosive device in his own bedroom. If the bridge plot had somehow failed, they would have eliminated him in the one place he should have felt safest. He typed a response. Secure it. Tell no one. Continue as if nothing is wrong. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Chapter 7. The morning sun brought an unexpected visitor to the presidential palace. The French ambassador, Michel Dumont, requested an urgent meeting with President Traoré. Under normal circumstances, such a meeting would have taken days to arrange, but Traoré's chief of staff was instructed to accommodate the ambassador immediately. This would be interesting. Ambassador Dumont was a career diplomat in his early 60s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed. He had been stationed in Ouagadougou for less than a year, having arrived after the deterioration of Franco-Burkinabé relations. His presence in the country was largely ceremonial now, maintaining a skeleton embassy staff while France redirected its African policy through other channels. Mr. President, I thank you for seeing me on such short notice. Dumont began as he was shown into Traoré's office. His French was perfect, naturally, but he had the courtesy to continue in English, acknowledging that Burkina Faso was no longer simply a French sphere of influence. Ambassador, I always have time for diplomatic courtesy, Traoré replied, gesturing to a chair. Though I suspect this isn't merely a courtesy call, Dumont settled into his seat with visible discomfort. I'll be direct, Mr. President. The French government has become aware of a concerning situation involving 4 European nationals currently in your custody. We understand they were engaged in infrastructure inspection work and have now been detained without charges. You're remarkably well informed about events that occurred only yesterday, Traoré observed. One might wonder how information travels so quickly. The ambassador shifted slightly. We maintain routine contact with our European partners. When EU citizens are detained abroad, particularly in regions with security concerns, we're naturally informed. I see. And did your routine contacts also inform you about what these infrastructure inspectors were actually doing? Dumont's expression remained carefully neutral. I'm not sure I understand. Traoré opened a laptop on his desk and turned it to face the ambassador. On the screen was a video compilation, surveillance footage and documentation from the bridge sites, showing the engineers planting explosives in the support structures. The evidence was irrefutable. The ambassador's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, confusion, and finally something that looked like genuine shock. Whatever he had expected from this meeting, it wasn't this. My God, Dumont whispered. They were trying to assassinate you. They nearly succeeded, Traoré confirmed. So you'll understand if I'm disinclined to simply release them because of EU concerns about their welfare. Mr. President, I assure you, the French government had no knowledge of this plot. These men don't work for us. We don't conduct assassinations, certainly not against sitting heads of state. Don't you? Traoré's tone was mild, but his eyes were sharp. History suggests otherwise. Thomas Sankara, my predecessor and inspiration, was assassinated with French complicity, or at the very least, French looking the other way while it happened. Dumont had no good response to this. The assassination of Sankara in 1987 remained a sore point in Franco-Burkinabé relations, with declassified documents suggesting at minimum that French intelligence had known about the coup plot and chose not to intervene. That was a different time, different leadership, the ambassador finally said. I'm authorized to offer the full cooperation of French intelligence services in investigating this matter. We want to know who's behind this as much as you do. Do you? Because my investigation suggests these men were facilitated by someone within my own government, someone who had access to classified information and could manipulate administrative processes. Finding that person requires trusting very few people, Ambassador, and forgive me if my trust in French assistance is somewhat limited. I understand your skepticism. But consider this. If there are rogue elements operating in your region, conducting unauthorized operations, that's a problem for everyone. It threatens to destabilize not just Burkina Faso, but the entire Sahel. Despite our political differences, neither France nor Burkina Faso benefits from that chaos. Traoré leaned back in his chair, studying the ambassador carefully. The man seemed sincere, but sincerity was easily faked in diplomatic circles. Still, there might be value in at least appearing to cooperate. Very well. I'll share what we've learned with your intelligence liaison. But understand this. Those 4 men are being charged with attempted murder, terrorism, and conspiracy to overthrow the government. They will face trial in Burkinabe courts under Burkinabe law. No negotiations, no prisoner exchanges, no diplomatic immunity claims. I'll relay that to Paris, Dumont agreed. May I ask what you intend to do about the traitor in your government? Find them, deal with them, but quietly. If we make a public spectacle of hunting for a mole, either they'll flee before we can identify them, or worse, they'll accelerate whatever other plans are in motion. Patience is required. After the ambassador departed, Colonel Diallo entered with an update on the internal investigation. We've narrowed it down, sir. The surveillance has been illuminating. He laid out several photographs on Traoré's desk. They showed Minister Ouedraogo at various locations around Ouagadougou, meeting with individuals who didn't appear in any government databases. The meetings were brief, careful, but they followed a pattern. Dead drops, brief conversations in public spaces, all the tradecraft of espionage. The minister, Traoré, felt disappointed rather than surprised. Ouedraogo had been a civil servant for decades, seemingly a harmless bureaucrat more concerned with his pension than politics. But that was exactly the kind of person who made an effective mole, invisible through boring competence. We traced his communications. He's been in contact with a shell company based in Luxembourg, receiving regular payments that he's hidden through various family members. The company is owned by a holding corporation, with ties to several private military contractors. Let me guess, Traoré said. One of those contractors employs men like Henrik Larsson. Exactly, sir. The money trail is complicated, deliberately so, but it all leads back to the same network. Private contractors, intelligence agencies using them for deniability, and corrupt officials who provide the necessary access and information. Traoré stood and walked to his window, a habit when he needed to think. Outside, Ouagadougou went about its daily business. Street vendors set up their stalls, motorcycles weaved through traffic, children walked to school, all of them unaware that their president had just uncovered a conspiracy that reached into the heart of government. Don't arrest him yet, Traoré decided. I want to know who else he's connected to. If we grab him now, others in the network will scatter. Let him think he's safe. Monitor everything he does, everyone he contacts. Let's map out this entire operation before we roll it up. Sir, every day we wait increases the risk. If he realizes we know, he won't realize. We're going to give him exactly what he wants to see. Business as usual. The captured engineers will be processed through the justice system. I'll make public statements about infrastructure improvements. Everything will seem normal. And in the meantime, we'll be watching, learning, preparing. Over the next several days, that's exactly what happened. The 4 engineers were formally charged and remanded to custody awaiting trial. Traoré gave speeches about strengthening national infrastructure and thanked the international community for their continued interest in Burkina Faso's development. To any outside observer, including Minister Ouedraogo, everything appeared to be proceeding normally. But behind the scenes, military intelligence was building a comprehensive picture of the conspiracy. They identified 6 other government officials who were part of the network May, ranging from a secretary in the foreign ministry to a colonel in army logistics. Each one had been compromised through some combination of money, blackmail, or ideological sympathy with Western interests. The investigation also revealed the full scope of the plot. The bridge bombings were supposed to be the catalyst for a wider destabilization campaign. Simultaneous insurgent attacks would have seized 3 northern towns. Rioting would have been organized in Ouagadougou, and a cabal of military officers, promised Western support, would have launched a coup to restore order and establish a government more amenable to European influence. It's elaborate, General Ouedraogo admitted during one of their late-night strategy sessions. They've been planning this for months, maybe years. Multiple layers, multiple contingencies. If the assassination failed, they had backup plans. If the coup attempt was exposed, they could blame it on rogue elements. They've insulated themselves remarkably well. But not well enough, Traoré said, because they made one crucial mistake. They underestimated us. They thought we were just another African military government, unsophisticated and easy to manipulate. They didn't account for the possibility that we might actually be competent. He looked around the room at his core team, the men and women he had fought alongside, who had risked everything to pull Burkina Faso back from the edge of collapse. We're going to dismantle this network, carefully, methodically, but completely. And we're going to send a message that Burkina Faso is not for sale, not to be manipulated, and certainly not to be conquered through conspiracy. When do we move? Colonel Diallo asked. Soon, very soon. But first, I want every piece of evidence documented, every connection mapped, every foreign intelligence service implicated identified. When we act, it needs to be decisive. No half measures, no loose ends, no opportunities for them to regroup and try again. The trap was being set. The hunters had become the hunted, and Ibrahim Traoré was about to demonstrate why underestimating him was a fatal mistake. Chapter 8. The operation began at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, a time when even the most vigilant targets are at their lowest alertness. Simultaneous raids were conducted across Ouagadougou and 3 other cities, coordinated by military intelligence with surgical precision. At Minister Ouedraogo's residence in an upscale neighborhood of the capital, a team led by Colonel Diallo breached the doors while the minister was asleep. He was arrested in his bedroom, given no opportunity to destroy evidence or alert co-conspirators. His computers, phones, and documents were seized intact, providing investigators with a treasure trove of incriminating communications. Similar scenes played out at 5 other locations. The secretary from the Foreign Ministry was taken from her apartment. The logistics colonel was arrested at his military quarters. A businessman who had served as a courier between the conspirators and their foreign handlers was picked up at a hotel where he was meeting with contacts from Ivory Coast. By sunrise, the entire network had been rolled up. Not a single target escaped. The speed and coordination of the operation left no room for warnings or last-minute flights from the country. Ibrahim Traoré was present at the central command post throughout the night, monitoring each arrest through real-time communications and video feeds. When the last target was confirmed in custody, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, but only a moment. The arrests were just the beginning. The interrogations began immediately. Unlike the relatively gentle questioning of the foreign engineers, this time there was no diplomatic courtesy to maintain. These were Burkinabe citizens who had betrayed their country. The full weight of military justice would be brought to bear. Minister Ouedraogo, confronted with undeniable evidence of his treachery, attempted to justify his actions. Sitting in an interrogation room with his expensive suit rumpled and his carefully maintained dignity shattered, he spoke with a mixture of defiance and desperation. "You don't understand the forces you're up against," he told Traoré during a personal interrogation. "The West doesn't accept leaders who refuse to play by their rules. Sankara tried to stand against them, and where did that get him? A grave and a failed revolution. I was trying to prevent the same fate for you, for all of us, by facilitating my assassination." Traoré's voice was cold. "By helping foreign agents plant explosives in our infrastructure, by coordinating with insurgents who have killed thousands of our citizens. That's your idea of prevention. It's called realism, Mr. President. You rejected French protection. Russian influence grows. You've isolated us from ECOWAS. Where does that leave us? Alone, vulnerable, and inevitably conquered by forces beyond our control. At least with Western backing, we could negotiate from a position of partnership. Partnership built on the graves of those who resist," Traoré countered. "That's not partnership, Minister. That's surrender disguised with diplomatic language." He stood, preparing to leave. "You'll face trial for treason. The evidence is overwhelming. I suspect you'll spend whatever years you have left contemplating whether your realism was worth the price." But Ouedraogo's interrogation did provide one crucial piece of information: the name of the primary foreign intelligence coordinator for the operation, a man named Marcus Ashford, officially listed as a development consultant with a Luxembourg-based NGO, actually a contractor working for a consortium of Western intelligence services. He had been the architect of the entire plot, coordinating between the various elements, ensuring plausible deniability for official governments while maintaining operational control. "Ashford is the key," General Sawadogo confirmed. "He's been operating in West Africa for years. Mali, Khan, Niger, Ivory Coast, and now here. Always behind the scenes, always technically just a civilian consultant. but his fingerprints are on every major political upheaval in the region for the past decade. Where is he now? Traoré asked. Our last intelligence puts him in Abidjan. He fled there 3 days ago. Probably got warning that we were getting close to his network. Ivory Coast won't extradite him. They benefit too much from French support to risk antagonizing their intelligence services. Traoré considered this problem. Ashford represented the external threat, the foreign manipulation that had nearly succeeded in destroying his presidency and plunging Burkina Faso into chaos. As long as people like him operated with impunity, the threat would continue. New conspiracies would be hatched. New local collaborators would be recruited, and the cycle of destabilization would persist. I want everything we have on Ashford compiled into a comprehensive dossier, Traoré ordered. Evidence of his operations, his methods, his network. Then I want it leaked to every major media outlet in Africa and beyond. Let the world see what foreign intelligence services are really doing in our region. Let's turn his asset into his liability. Over the next week, that's exactly what happened. Journalists from international outlets received anonymous packages containing meticulously documented evidence of Western intelligence operations in the Sahel. The story broke globally, creating a diplomatic crisis that forced several governments to issue denials and conduct internal reviews. Marcus Ashford's face appeared on news programs across Africa, identified as a key figure in destabilization efforts. His cover was thoroughly blown. His usefulness as a covert operator ended. He would never be able to work in Africa again without being recognized. But Traoré's most important audience wasn't the international media. It was his own people. He addressed the nation in a televised speech, laying out the conspiracy in stark terms, explaining how close Burkina Faso had come to being torn apart by foreign manipulation and domestic betrayal. My fellow Burkinabe, he said, speaking directly to the camera with the intensity that had made him a compelling leader. We have faced and overcome an attempt to destroy our nation from within, not through conventional military force, which we have proven capable of resisting, but through corruption, conspiracy, and betrayal. Those who thought they could buy or intimidate us into submission have learned otherwise. He paused, letting his words sink in. But this victory isn't about one president or one government. It's about the principle that we as a nation have the right to determine our own destiny. We rejected French colonialism. We rejected ECOWAS pressure. We rejected foreign military bases, and we have now rejected foreign assassination plots. Each time we are told that resistance is futile, that we must accept outside control for our own good. Each time we prove them wrong. The speech resonated across Burkina Faso and beyond. In Ouagadougou's streets, people celebrated. In military barracks, soldiers felt vindicated. In neighboring countries, where populations also chafed under perceived foreign manipulation, Traoré's words found receptive audiences. The captured engineers were put on trial in a proceeding that was televised and open to international observers. They were convicted of terrorism and attempted murder, receiving lengthy prison sentences. Their confessions, obtained legally and documented thoroughly, provided additional evidence of the broader conspiracy. The Burkinabe government officials who had participated in the plot faced military tribunals. Most were convicted of treason and sentenced to life imprisonment. Minister Ouedraogo, as the highest-ranking conspirator, received particularly harsh treatment. His conviction was swift, his assets seized, his family's reputation destroyed. But Traoré also showed strategic mercy where appropriate. Several lower-level officials who had been coerced or manipulated into minor roles were given reduced sentences in exchange for full cooperation. This approach both punished the truly guilty and sent a message that redemption was possible for those willing to come forward. Throughout this period, the insurgent threat continued. The militants had launched their planned offensive, but without the chaos of a successful assassination, the Burkinabe military was able to respond effectively. Several major attacks were repelled, and government forces actually regained control of territories that had been lost in previous months. The insurgents bet everything on our government collapsing, Colonel Diallo reported during a security briefing. When that didn't happen, their offensive became disorganized. We've been able to push them back in several sectors. Good, Traoré replied, but stay vigilant. Desperate enemies are often the most dangerous. They'll be looking for ways to regain their lost momentum. Indeed, the fighting in the north intensified. The insurgents, realizing that their window of opportunity was closing, launched increasingly bold attacks, but they were facing a Burkinabe military that was now more unified, more motivated, and better coordinated than before. The conspiracy had, paradoxically, strengthened rather than weakened the government's position. Traced in Chapter 9, 6 weeks after the arrests, Ibrahim Traoré stood on the reconstructed bridge where the first explosives had been planted. The structure had been thoroughly repaired, reinforced, and ceremonially reopened. The event was symbolic as much as practical, demonstrating that Burkina Faso could not only survive attempts at destruction, but emerge stronger. The ceremony was attended by dignitaries from across Africa, representatives from the Alliance of Sahel States, and notably, ambassadors from several countries that had previously been lukewarm in their support. The conspiracy's exposure had shifted diplomatic calculations. Nations that had hedged their bets on Burkina Faso's survival now saw stability and strength. "This bridge represents more than infrastructure," Traoré said in his dedication speech. "It represents our resilience. Foreign agents attempted to destroy it as part of a plot to destroy our nation. They failed. Our people, our soldiers, our collective determination proved stronger than their schemes." He gestured to the bridge. "We could have simply demolished this structure and built a new one. But we chose to repair and strengthen what was already here. That's a metaphor for our entire approach. We don't reject everything that came before. We don't burn it all down and start over. We identify what's valuable, repair what's damaged, and build something stronger on foundations that have proven their worth." In the crowd, he noticed the French ambassador, Michel Dumont, listening intently. Their relationship had evolved over the past weeks. France had actually been helpful in tracking down other members of the conspiracy network in Europe, perhaps recognizing that being associated with failed assassination plots was bad for their reputation across Africa. After the ceremony, Dumont approached Traoré privately. "Mr. President, I've been authorized to convey a message from Paris. While France doesn't endorse all of your government's positions, we recognize your legitimate authority and your right to govern as you see fit. We'd like to restart diplomatic dialogue on a more equal footing." "Equal footing," Traoré repeated. "That's a refreshing change from the usual French approach to Africa. The world is changing, Mr. President. Old colonial reflexes don't work anymore, if they ever really did. Perhaps it's time for a new kind of relationship, one based on actual partnership rather than patron-client dynamics." "Perhaps," Traoré agreed, "but understand this. Burkina Faso's sovereignty is non-negotiable. We'll work with anyone who respects that principle. But the days of allowing foreign powers to dictate our internal affairs are over." As the day progressed, Traoré made a point of personally thanking Lieutenant Konate and the explosives team that had saved his life. He met with families of soldiers who had died fighting insurgents in the north, offering what comfort he could and promising that their sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten. He visited a school where children had prepared drawings and songs, celebrating the country's survival of the conspiracy. One young girl, maybe 10 years old, approached him shyly. "Mr. President, my teacher said bad people tried to hurt you, but you were too smart for them. Is that true?" Traoré knelt down to her eye level. "It's partly true. I had help from many brave people. But yes, we were able to stop people who wanted to harm our country. Do you know why we succeeded?" The girl shook her head. "Because we stayed vigilant. We asked questions instead of blindly trusting. We worked together instead of fighting each other. Those are lessons everyone can learn, not just presidents." It was a small moment, barely noticed by the officials and security personnel surrounding him, but it reminded Traoré why this work mattered. It wasn't about personal power or prestige. It was about protecting a future where children like this girl could grow up in a stable, sovereign nation. That evening, back at the presidential palace, Traoré convened a private meeting with his closest advisors. The public ceremonies were over, but the strategic work continued. "We've won this round," he told them. "But we'd be foolish to think this is over. Foreign intelligence services are patient. They plan in terms of years and decades, not days and weeks. They'll analyze what went wrong, adjust their methods, and try again." "So how do we prepare?" General Sawadogo asked. "First, we institutionalize the lessons we've learned. The security protocols that caught this conspiracy need to become standard operating procedure. Background checks, surveillance of high-level officials with access to sensitive information, compartmentalization of critical intelligence. We can't rely on my personal instinct forever. He stood and began pacing, a habit when working through complex problems. Second, we need to develop our own intelligence capabilities. Right now, we're reactive, defending against threats we can barely see coming. We need to be proactive, identifying threats before they materialize, understanding the foreign networks that operate in our region. That's expensive, someone pointed out. Our budget is already stretched thin, fighting the insurgency. It's expensive until the day it prevents another conspiracy and saves countless lives, Traoré countered. Then, it's the best money we ever spent. Find the funding. Cut waste elsewhere if necessary. This is a priority. Colonel Diallo spoke up. What about the insurgents? They're weakened, but not defeated. They're still controlling territory in the north. The insurgents are symptoms of deeper problems, Traoré replied. Poverty, lack of opportunity, ethnic tensions, and yes, foreign manipulation. We can fight them militarily, and we will continue to do so. But long-term victory requires addressing those underlying issues: economic development, education, bringing isolated communities into the national fabric. That sounds like the work of generations, not years. Exactly, which is why we need to start now. Every school we build, every clinic we open, every road we pave into remote areas, that's a brick in the foundation of a stable future. The military can buy us time, but only development can buy us peace. Over the following months, Burkina Faso did begin implementing those changes. Foreign aid that had been suspended was partially restored as countries recognized the government's stability. Gold revenues from the nationalized mines were redirected toward infrastructure projects. Training programs for security services were expanded, with emphasis on intelligence gathering and analysis. The alliance of Sahel states, the partnership between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, grew stronger. The three nations shared intelligence about insurgent movements and foreign interference. They coordinated military operations along their shared borders. And crucially, they presented a united front diplomatically, making it harder for outside powers to play them against each other. Traoré also began mentoring a new generation of officers and civil servants, sharing the lessons he'd learned from detecting and defeating the conspiracy. He was acutely aware that he was young for a head of state, and that unexpected events could occur at any time. The nation's security couldn't depend on one person, no matter how capable. The strongest institutions are those that can survive the loss of any individual, he told a class of military academy cadets during a lecture. Build systems, not cults of personality. Create procedures, not dependencies on one leader's judgment. That's how nations endure.